All right, so today we got to talk about the mask cult. Now, this is something that's getting worse and worse, pretty much by the day, it seems. I mean, we went from 2 months ago, when this thing first started, it was masks don't work, and nobody supported the idea of mask usage. And then we slowly transitioned to, yeah, you should maybe wear a mask, to everybody needs to wear a mask, no matter where you are. And I mean, the first thing to point out here is that there's plenty of examples of the whole mask things not working. I mean, you take Edmonton for example, they mandated masks on the first, I believe. Their new cases have only gone up since then. I mean, we're 3 weeks in, and the new the amount of cases is more than doubled. So, I mean, that's one example. You have California, New Mexico. You have plenty of areas. Spain. Those are just off the top of my head, the ones I know of. I mean, even Ontario and Quebec, it had little to no effect. And I don't think Ontario or Quebec was a provincial wide thing, but I do know that Toronto had it, Guelph had it. I believe pretty much every major city in Ontario had it. So, um, yeah, there's no example in Canada of this whole mask thing making a big. I mean, there probably is one. People point to, oh, here's one area, but I mean, you look at the biggest areas. There's clearly no evidence of it, and this is what we're hearing now too. That I've been pointing this out to people largely on social media, and it's because people aren't wearing them properly, and they're not wearing them enough. Well, that is exactly what I said would happen. That is exactly what I said because anybody with half a brain knows that the vast majority of people do not wear their masks properly, right? Like they don't, and this is the other thing too, that masks do have negative health effects. They will downregulate your immune system. Now the pro-mask Nazis will deny that, but that's about as established a science as there possibly is, right? And we know that it's very simple that when you don't expose yourself to a normal amount of bacteria or whatever, you will not have immunity to it. When you do it, you will have immunity. That is why that when the Europeans came over with with the diseases that the natives had no immunity to, they died so much more, right? But according to the mask Nazis, that wouldn't be happening, right? Because it doesn't matter if you have a natural immunity to it, right? So they're so wrong when it comes to that. It's not even funny. So that is the first thing. And again, I do have a story here titled out of the New York Post. Sweden's disease expert says just wearing face masks could be very dangerous. Now, again, Sweden has been one of the places that has had the best approach to this. Now, a lot of people, especially the mask cult, will point out and be like, "Oh no, they're wrong. They're wrong." Well, no, actually, they were right. And the reason why you know that is that and the reason why the pro mask people and the pro lockdown people don't even believe it either. Um, the Sweden was almost exclusively talked about in the media when they were having a higher amount of deaths. And when they first started, that was true. They were having more cases, they were having more deaths. Now there was places that were hit harder. I mean, New York was hit way harder. I mean, Spain, Italy were hit harder, and the mainstream media wasn't harping on them. So it's just more proof that there's just a massive bias. But the main point being is that um, over the last month or two, the mainstream media has completely stopped talking about Sweden, like completely. And why have they done that? Because Sweden is basically back to normal. I mean, they don't have mask mandates, they don't have any lockdowns, they are back to normal. And they are having literally like one death per day. Like literally, they're having next to no deaths. The cases are way down. And what science shows that this is happening? Well, the science that I've literally cited many of these things. So again, anybody saying, "Oh, you're just making crap up," no, I've literally showed experts who have said this, that yeah, the studies are looking like anywhere from about 10% to 25%. Once 10 to 25% of the, and then again that is a rather wide range because different places has been a different, slightly different amount. But once upwards of 25% of the population has been infected, the virus basically disappears. Like it basically disappears. I mean, you've seen doctors in Italy bringing that up, in Sweden, that yeah, it basically doesn't exist here anymore. And that is looking back on it, and it's already obvious, but it will be even more obvious, down the road, that the clear way of going about things. And this is another reason why Sweden, the one thing Sweden did get wrong, which this is another reason why you know that the media and all these idiots are just completely biased, because Sweden got it right in that they didn't lock down. It is so obvious that the lockdowns had next to no effect whatsoever, and they had tons of negative effect, namely the suicide, the depression, the fact that, like I say, it was largely unneeded. Um, Sweden got that right, but the thing they got wrong was that they didn't have more precautions when it came to nursing homes. That is the same reason why Sweden got hit hard, is because of the whole nursing home thing. If you would have had, stringent precautions when it came to nursing homes and kept things open, that is the strategy that has been proven to be right. And this is the thing too, why I hold some of these Western leaders accountable, is that we knew coming out of Italy and Spain that that was one of the major things. It was the old people that were causing these high amounts of deaths. So we should have just did that. Let's have let's basically focus our entire thing on preventing the elderly from dying, and anybody under that 50 to 60 range should, like, if you're under 50 to 60, your life should have looked almost exactly the same. I mean, other aside from the fact that there's more regulations when you want to visit your grandparents or your parents, whatever need may be. But other than that, it should have been completely normal. And this idea that people saying, "Oh, because of that, everybody needs to law," no, that is insane. And that's the thing too that I've said, is that if you're that old and you want to completely destroy society for a year or two, maybe even upwards of a decade, just so you can do that kind of, to me that's incredibly selfish. Like, if you're 80, 85 years old and you want everybody else to completely shut down society to basically a standstill just so you can live an extra year or two, I mean, to me that's incredibly selfish. Now, if you would disagree, fine, but again, that's my opinion. And the average age of death, and in Alberta it's like 82, right? And the average age to live is like 80. So the fact that the average person dying of this is already past the average age of the average person just goes to show that we completely overreacted to this. So I brought up the fact that the whole mask thing is a cult. Now, I do have a thing out of the Atlantic here, and it's seven signs you're in, or warning signs of a cult. Now, again, they specifically focus on religious things, which I think is very disingenuous. The fact that whenever people think of cult, they immediately think of religious ones, not the many non-religious ones. Namely the mask one. In that, number one, they have here opposing critical thinking. Well, that's one of the biggest things that the mask people do, right? Like, you can't question anything. You can't be like, hey, you know, wearing a mask is going to have negative effects too, right? No, they don't let you do that. They don't let you be like, hey, if we're going to have this mandatory mask thing, we need a sunset clause in this too. And that's one of the reasons why I believe, I hope that the whole Rocco Galati and these people that are challenging this, why it should get struck down. Because as far as I'm aware, if I mean, number one, I don't think the government should be able to do this to begin with, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure exactly whether or not they are allowed to do it. But the one thing that I do know, that I am rather certain of, but not 100%, is that if they are going to do something like this whole mandatory mask garbage, they need to have a sunset clause, and a reasonable sunset clause, meaning that you can't just make it from here until eternity everyone's going to wear masks, which it seems like that's the case, right? I mean, remember 15 days to flatten the curve, or 2 weeks to flatten the curve? We're 4 months in, 5 months into it, and there's plenty of places that are still have lockdown restrictions. It's going to be the same thing. I mean, these people are literally saying, yeah, we're going to have to wear masks for at least another year or two. If you add up the whole 15 days to flatten the curve, we're going to be wearing masks for the next decades. So, and that's the thing too. Like, I brought this up so many times. Like, Nova Scotia mandated masks, and at the time they had one active case in the whole province. Anybody who thinks that this whole mask thing has anything to do with safety, then you are insane. If it did, why would you mandate masks when you have one active case in the whole province? Like, it is insane. Um, isolating members and penalizing them for leaving. Well, of course they do this kind of stuff. They shout you. They think you're one and of the same. Of, oh, you're the same thing as the whole vaccine, denier or the Holocaust denier. Like they want to group you in with the worst people they can possibly imagine for disagreeing with this kind of stuff. So the whole mask thing, they're two for two right here, right? So, emphasizing special doctrines outside Scripture, yeah, they do that. Seeking inappropriate loyalty to their leaders. This is one of the worst things of this. So again, they're 4 for 4 so far. This is the thing. Well, it doesn't matter if Tam and Fauci and all these idiots told us the exact opposite 3 months ago. It doesn't matter. And this is the thing too. These people say, "Oh, the science changed." Well, number one, the science did not change. I've yet to see anybody show me a controlled study that shows that masks work. Every article that these people bring up in debates is simply anecdotal. Oh, this area had masks and the cases went down, therefore masks work. No, that's literally the correlation causation fallacy. So again, show us a controlled study, and show us a controlled study that shows that there isn't negative ramifications as well. Like, that's the thing. Two people say, oh, it reduces cases 10%, but does it increase other health effects 10%? Like, that's the thing they need to see. So dishonoring the family unit. Now, again, that's a little more of a religious thing. Crossing biblical boundaries of behavior. Again, that's more of a religious thing. Separation from the church. This one, yeah, it's number 7. It's the same, not in the whole church thing, but separation of the religion of you must support, our team basically, or our side. So, um, this whole mask stuff, it doesn't fit the whole things that you would look for in a cult perfectly, but it does probably 80 to 90% of it. And this is why, like, if and this is the thing too, that if your worldview is shrouded in reality, and you have plenty of evidence to back it up, so on and so forth, then you don't need to you would never need to vilify people for questioning your motives, right? And this is one of the many reasons how you can tell if someone's ideas are good and actually have, data to back it up, so on and so forth, is that if they viciously shout you down and, group you in with Holocaust deniers and all this garbage that they try and do, then your worldview isn't shrouded in reality. It really isn't, because if you had all the evidence in the world to back up your worldview, you wouldn't have to do all this kind of stuff. You wouldn't have to question people who just simply want to think critically, right? And that's just the crazy stuff. And this is the thing too, that a lot of people say, oh, the whole mask stuff, it's not that bad yet. Like, it's not that bad so far, right? But this is where they go wrong. Like, this is where they go wrong in that, I mean, it's the same thing with, 15 days to flatten the curve, and people are like, oh yeah, it's only 15 days, whatever. Um, this is not going to be like this. For all we know, they're going to continue to push it even more and more. I mean, I seen a company that literally is forcing their employees to wear masks on Zoom meetings. Like, this, the insanity knows no bounds. So again, that's something that people really need to realize, that the insanity knows no bounds. And the one thing that I have gotten wrong about this whole thing, that I will admit, I mean, I've gotten most things right, but the one thing that I definitely got wrong is that I drastically underestimated politicians and the average person out there, just how insane and over the top they would get. Like, when this whole thing first started, I thought, oh yeah, it's not really a political thing. We do have some small common differences, but when it's all said and done, we all want the same thing. But I radically underestimated that, and that people have viciously politicized this issue. Um, you know, and I drastically underestimated just how ignorant the average person would be. Like, drastically underestimated it. So anyway, the next thing I wanted to bring up is also to do with Sweden. This is from John Blum, who's a pro hockey player. I think he played in the NHL for a little bit, but anyway, 3 weeks in Sweden and haven't seen one mask. Old and young out about living their life. Restaurants, bars, cafes, all open. People aren't living in fear. Amazing to see. Economy open and people are smiling. Again, if you look up the mainstream media's coverage of Sweden, like I mentioned earlier, they almost have exclusively stopped talking about it over the last couple months. Why? Because they've had very few cases. Meanwhile, in Canada and the States, our cases, especially in the States, they've stayed pretty high. Um, and it's like I say, they don't want to admit that the lockdowns don't work. That is the last thing they want to do, is not admit the lockdowns don't work. And at the very least, admit that, hey, maybe the lockdowns work to some degree, but the negative ramifications of the lockdown were far worse than whatever positive came out of it, right? So yeah, it's like I say, that Sweden, the one thing, yeah, Sweden did mess up. They should have, been more concerned with the elderly, but when it came to everybody else, yeah, Sweden did exactly what we should have did, and this is the thing too, that we there may be a push for a second lockdown. I don't think that, my guess is that there will be a push, um, assuming the cases go up in the winter time, which the evidence kind of shows like it will. If you look back at history, usually there is second waves. But again, people trying to compare it to the Spanish flu is absolutely insane. Like, that's like comparing a 6-year-old girl to Mike Tyson. Like, they're not even in the same league. Like, not even close. So they're not going to be the same. But I do think that there will be a little bit of a spike at some point again. Exactly what I predicted is about a month or two ago is happened. I said, late July. Yeah, the cases are probably going to go down over the next month or two. They'll probably come back up in late fall or in the winter sometime. People will probably call for lockdowns, but again, they've kind of transitioned away from lockdowns to the whole mask garbage. And I don't know what they're going to do when it's shown that the masks are completely useless. I don't know what they'll do. I mean, my guess is that, I think that the one caveat would be is if a vaccine comes out, there will be a push to force everybody to get a vaccine. If one of those ID chips and contact tracing and all that garbage comes along even further, they'll probably push for that. But again, like, I don't know, because what they seem to do is they milk their lie as much as they possibly can, and then when that's proven to be wrong, they just milk a different lie, right? So yeah. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, kind of unrelated story, from Charlie Kirk here. A former FBI official just pled guilty to altering official documents so that James Comey, Peter Strzok, and Andy McCabe could spy on the Trump campaign. You'd think that'd be a bigger story, right? And this is the thing too that I bring up, and um, it's very crazy that you talk to most people out there these days, and they still believe the whole Russia collusion, conspiracy theory, but yet they're completely unaware of the fact that the real scandal was the Obama administration illegally spying on the Trump campaign. And this is one of the things too, when it comes to Trump too, that people don't realize, is that he literally was illegally spied on for I don't even know how long, and yet they still lost. Like, the Democrats cheated in multiple ways, and yet they still lost the election. Like, this is what people don't realize, and they're probably going to cheat in a different way. But what people don't realize is that if the elections and the mainstream media and like everything was actually a level playing field, Trump would probably win 80 to 90% of the not maybe not the vote, but the electoral college. Like, he would probably win 90% of the delegates. Like, he'd definitely be over 400. But because the media is so biased, because the Democrats cheat and usually get away with it, that's why elections are so close. And it's not because Trump is that great. Like, I don't think Trump is that great. I mean, to me, he's just good enough to, like, if Trump was running against Trudeau, like, yeah, I would vote for him because he's just good enough. And I think anybody who questions that, I mean, to me, you're kind of insane. But um, some people do have legitimate reasons to not be supportive of Trump, but the vast majority of people, it's just emotional mumbo jumbo that they'll believe whatever CBC tells them, all that garbage. Um, but anyway, it's very insane that this kind of stuff is going on. Like, why is this not a bigger story? Like, the presidential campaign was literally illegally spied on. Probably, honestly, like, this is one of the biggest scandals in presidential history, right? Right? Like, this is arguably as bad of or worse scandal than Watergate, but yet you ask the average person, they know what Watergate is, but they don't know what this is. So anyway, not to mention too, this just exposes to the fact that the FBI is an incredibly corrupt organization, like incredibly corrupt. And a lot of these government organizations, that is one of the problems with government nowadays, is that as bad as the politicians are, a lot of these, these government organizations, that's where all the real corruption is, because, if a politician does something illegal, it is a little bit easier to I mean, again, even though Obama should be in jail right now, he's never going to go to jail. But again, these FBI people are even more shielded usually because again they can do a lot better job covering up their malfeasance. So yeah, it's insane stuff. But again, nothing's really going to come of it, unfortunately. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out those other links in the description. Make sure you follow me there. Very important that you do that if you haven't already. And last thing, stay tuned for more.